Welcome back to the Nancy Levin Show. There is something about truth. It is patient. It does not usually arrive all at once. It does not announce itself with fanfare or arrive on your doorstep with a clear set of instructions. More often, it comes quietly. Truth taps you on the shoulder. It whispers. It nudges. It shows up in the middle of an ordinary Tuesday, in the pause between one thing and the next, in the moment just before sleep when the noise of the day has finally settled. And if you ignore it, if you brush it aside or tell yourself that you're overreacting or convince yourself it will pass, it doesn't disappear. It waits. And then it taps you again. I think so many of us know this feeling. Maybe you're feeling it right now. That subtle, persistent sense that something is off, that something has shifted, that the life you're living may still look fine, maybe even great from the outside. But on the inside, something no longer quite fits. And you can't always name it right away. Sometimes it shows up as restlessness, that low hum of unease that you can't locate. Sometimes it shows up as resentment that flares up in situations where it feels out of proportion. And sometimes it shows up as boredom so deep it has become a kind of grief. Sometimes it shows up as exhaustion that sleep can't fix. And sometimes it shows up as a longing you cannot explain for something more, something different, something that feels more like you. But underneath all of it, the truth is there, trying to get your attention, trying to bring you back into alignment with yourself. And today I want to talk about that truth. Not the dramatic bolt of lightning kind, but the quieter, more persistent kind, the kind that has been following you around for months, maybe even years. The kind that you have been very skillfully managing and reframing and redirecting so that you do not have to stop and face it. Because facing it feels like too much. Because facing it might mean everything has to change. Or so we fear. And so we stay in motion. We stay busy. We stay productive. We stay helpful. We stay in the story that everything is fine until one day we can't anymore. So let's talk about what is actually happening and what becomes possible when you finally stop fighting what you know. Here's something I want to name right here up front because I think it frames everything. Truth is not trying to ruin your life. Truth is trying to return you to you. And that distinction is essential because so many of us experience truth as a threat, as a disruption, as something that if fully acknowledged, it will blow up the structure we have carefully built around ourselves. And I understand that. I really do, because once you know something, you can't unknow it. Once you know a relationship is no longer aligned, you can't unknow that. Once you know a job is slowly draining the life out of you, you can't unknow that. Once you know that the version of yourself you've been performing, the agreeable one, the capable one, the one who never asks for too much, is no longer sustainable, you can't unknow that. And once you know that your yes is not true, that your smile is a performance, that your contentment is manufactured, something inside you changes, even if nothing on the outside has shifted yet. And that internal shift matters because internal truth is the beginning of external change. But here is why so many people stay stuck for so long, even after the truth has made itself known. The truth rarely comes with instructions. It doesn't hand you a roadmap. It doesn't guarantee outcomes. It doesn't promise that what comes next will be easier or better or more comfortable than what you're leaving. Sometimes truth shows up to say, you cannot keep doing this. Sometimes truth shows up to say, there's something more for you. Sometimes it just says, this version of your life no longer fits who you are becoming. And the mind, the part of us that is designed for safety and predictability, wants certainty before it will release what no longer works. The mind says, show me what comes next, and then I'll let go. But truth says, let go first, and then you'll be able to see. That tension between the mind's need for certainty and truth's invitation into the unknown is where so many people live. Maybe it's where you're living right now, stuck in the in-between, stuck in bargaining, trying to make the old truth work again, stuck in justifying, building the case for why staying makes sense, stuck in delay, telling yourself that now is just not the right time. And underneath all of that staying, all of that managing, all of that effort to hold the current reality together, there is a cost. Because here's what I've seen over and over again in my own life and in the lives of the people I coach. What begins as a whisper can become anxiety. What begins as a nudge can become burnout. What begins as quiet dissatisfaction can become full body exhaustion. What begins as a longing can become a life crisis. Not as punishment, but because what is true will eventually ask to be lived. And if it's not lived consciously, if it's suppressed and managed and negotiated against, it often starts erupting in ways we did not choose. In illness, in rage, in numbing, in relationships falling apart, in deep bone-level tiredness no vacation can fix. So the question is not, will truth eventually get your attention? The question is, will you let it in before it has to get loud? So I want to slow down here because I think there is something we skip over too quickly in conversations about truth and growth and change. There is grief in telling the truth. Real grief. There's grief in admitting that everything is no longer right, even if it once was. There's grief in outgrowing an identity you worked hard to build. There's grief in acknowledging that the life you carefully constructed, the relationship you deeply invested in, the role you have faithfully inhabited, may no longer be the thing that is meant to carry you forward. And I think one of the reasons people resist their truth for so long is not laziness, not weakness, not a lack of self-awareness. It's because somewhere deep down, they sense the grief that lives on the other side of honesty. And grief is uncomfortable. Grief requires us to feel the full weight of what we are releasing. But here's what I've learned and what I want you to know. The grief on the other side of truth is not endless. The grief of staying is. Really, really take that in. The grief of staying, the grief of knowing something and refusing to acknowledge it. That grief is paid in small installments every single day. It costs you energy, in vitality, in the quiet resignation of slowly abandoning yourself. The grief on the other side of truth, while it can be acute, while it can feel enormous, it is grief that moves, grief that processes, grief that eventually, when you let yourself feel it fully, gives way to something else, to spaciousness, to relief, to a strange and unexpected sense of freedom. I remember a time in my own life when I was holding on to a version of reality that I already knew wasn't true. I was telling myself a story, a very convincing story full of reasonable justifications because the alternative felt like too much to face. And the energy required to maintain that story, to keep that story coherent, to keep performing confidence I did not feel, was staggering. I didn't even realize how much it was costing me until I finally let it go. And when I did, the first thing I felt was not triumph, it was grief. And then underneath the grief, relief. Because I no longer had to hold something together that was not true. And that relief, that release of the performance, that is what becomes available on the other side of honesty. So I say this with as much compassion as I can. The grief is not a sign that you were wrong to face your truth. It means you are finally free to begin building what actually fits who you are now. So I'm going to pause here for a moment. If you are listening and you are recognizing yourself in the whisper, in the nudge, in the grief of something you already know to be true, I invite you to join me for Reignite Your Spark. This is a free 5-day experience I created for you for this moment. You can feel that something needs to change, and yet you're not quite sure what or how or where to begin. Over the course of 5 days, I will send you an email with a short video and a short prompt. You'll get a lovely workbook to use. And this is all here for you to reconnect with your truth, your desires, with the voice inside of you that's been trying to get your attention. So this is about remembering yourself. You can join for free at nancylevin.com/spark. nancylevin.com/spark. Do it now, and I'll see you in your inbox. Now, let's keep going because there's more I want to say about what comes after the truth arrives. One of the things I see most often, and one of the patterns that keeps people stuck the longest, is waiting for permission to tell themselves the truth. Waiting for enough evidence, waiting for enough pain, waiting for enough certainty, waiting for some external confirmation from a therapist, a coach, a friend, a partner, a sign from the universe that what they are sensing is valid, that what they feel is real, that they are allowed to know what they know. But here's what I want you to hear. Your truth does not need a committee. Your knowing does not become more true because someone else validates it. You know what you know. You are the expert on you. And part of what it means to truly trust yourself is being willing to honor what you know before the world confirms it. This is a significant shift, and I want to be honest about how difficult it is. Because we've been trained, many of us from a very young age, to outsource our knowing, to look outward for confirmation of what is real and true and acceptable, to measure our experience against other people's reactions before we allow ourselves to claim it. And that outsourcing is a form of self-abandonment. It's subtle. It is often well-intentioned, but it's still a way of saying what I sense on my own is not enough. I need someone else to confirm it before I can trust it. And truth asks for something different. Truth asks for inner authority. It asks you to become willing to stand with yourself, to say, I know this. I may not know everything. I may not know what comes next. I may not be able to perfectly explain it or defend it in an argument, but I know this. And that knowing matters. I also want to say something about what self-honesty actually looks and sounds like in practice, because I think it can feel like a very grand, very overwhelming concept, but it does not have to begin dramatically. It can begin very simply. It can begin with, This doesn't feel good anymore. I'm no longer okay with this. I want something different. I'm tired of pretending. I have been overriding what I know for a long time, and I cannot keep doing that. I have outgrown this version of myself. Any of that is enough. You do not need the whole plan. You do not need to know every step. You do not need to see the entire staircase. You only need to be willing to acknowledge the first step, which is simply stopping the argument with yourself. Because here's what I see over and over again. When you stop lying to yourself, when you stop spending energy on the maintenance of a story that is no longer true, something remarkable happens. You get your life force back. And all of that energy that was going toward maintaining denial, toward suppressing desire, toward minimizing your own experience, toward managing appearances, your energy and resource starts to return to you. And with that energy, something that felt impossible begins to feel possible. Choice. Real choice, not reactive choice, not fear-based choice, not the kind of choice that's really just another form of self-betrayal dressed up in practical reasoning, but genuine choice rooted in what is actually true for you. And from genuine choice, you begin to build a life that actually fits. Now, I want to address something that I know is real because we've talked about grief, about self-honesty, about inner authority, and all of that is vital. But there's another layer that keeps people silent and stuck, and I want to name it directly here. Sometimes telling your truth will have someone else feel disappointed or hurt or angry. Sometimes living in alignment with what is true for you disrupts someone else's expectations. Sometimes honoring yourself means you're no longer available to perform the role other people have come to rely on. And that can be extraordinarily painful, especially if your identity, your value, your sense of worth has been built around accommodating, around being easy, around being good and reliable and self-sacrificing. For those of us who were trained to believe that our worth lives in our usefulness to other people, disappointing someone can feel like a moral failure. It can feel like you're doing something wrong, like you're breaking something that can't be fixed. And I want to be clear about this. Someone else's disappointment does not make your truth wrong. Someone else's discomfort does not invalidate your knowing. Someone else's inability to handle your honesty is not evidence that you should have stayed silent. It's not permission to be careless with other people's hearts. It is not permission to dismiss the impact your choices have on people around you, but it is permission to stop making other people's comfort the ceiling of your own life. Because here's what happens when you do that. When you make everyone else's approval the filter through which your truth must pass before you're allowed to live it, you betray yourself quietly, consistently, in ways that accumulate. And that accumulation of self-suppression, of swallowed truth, of needs repeatedly placed at the bottom of the list, that is what eventually becomes resentment, bitterness, exhaustion so deep it feels like it lives inside your bones. Learning to let your truth matter more than someone else's approval is not a one-time decision. It is a practice. It's a practice of choosing yourself again and again in the small moments and the large ones. It's a practice of saying, my knowing has authority in my own life. It's a practice of learning to let people be disappointed without abandoning yourself in the process. And if you've spent a lifetime learning that it's your job to manage other people's feelings, that is a long, important unlearning. And it's possible, and it's worth it. Because on the other side of that unlearning is a kind of freedom that most people pleasers never even let themselves imagine. The freedom of not performing, the freedom of being known rather than managed, the freedom of a life that's actually yours. So as we come to a close of today's episode, I want to name something that I think is true about the moment you might be in right now. You might be tired, not just physically tired, but tired in a deeper way, tired of talking yourself out of what you know, tired of shrinking around your own truth, tired of the sheer effort it takes to stay split, to hold two things at once, what is true and the story you've been telling yourself about why you can't act on it yet. And if that exhaustion is what you're feeling right now, I want to offer you a change of perspective. That exhaustion may not be the problem. It might be the portal. It might be the moment when your deeper self is finally loud enough, clear enough, insistent enough to say, enough. Enough pretending, enough postponing, enough negotiating, enough abandoning, enough losing and leaving yourself in the hopes that if you just hold on a little longer, something will shift without you having to be honest. And in that moment, when enough finally means enough, that is a sacred moment, because that's where the next chapter begins. Not with certainty, not with a plan, not even with the guarantee that everything will work out beautifully, but with honesty. And honesty, it turns out, is the most generative thing, because once you stop lying to yourself, you can begin to hear yourself again. You can begin to discern what you actually want. You can begin to trust what you actually feel. You can begin to make choices that come from a place of knowing rather than fear or habit or the approval of others. And that clarity, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it requires courage, even when it disappoints someone, that clarity is the beginning of a life that actually belongs to you. So I will leave you with this. Truth will keep tapping you on the shoulder, not to punish you, not to shame you for how long you've stayed, not to make you wrong for everything you've tried, but because it loves you too much to let you stay asleep inside a life that no longer belongs to you. And so if truth has been tapping you on the shoulder, listen. If it has been whispering, pause. If it has been returning again and again, trust that there's a reason. Not because you have to have it all figured out. Not because you have to take a dramatic leap tomorrow, but because simply turning toward your truth, simply acknowledging what you know is already an act of profound self-respect. It's already a step, and it is a step that changes everything. The truth is not trying to take something from you. It's trying to bring you back to life. I'm so glad you've been here with me today. Thank you for listening, and thank you for genuinely being willing to turn toward what is true for you.